The drive back from Portland always felt longer than it actually was. My knees ached the way they always do after a long trip, and I shifted in the seat, watching the familiar highway signs tell me I was getting closer to home. 6 weeks. That's how long I'd been away, first helping my sister recover from her hip surgery in Oregon, then staying a few extra days because she cried when I mentioned leaving. I didn't mind. Dorothy had always needed me more than she let on, and at 63 years old, I understood that some distances only grow if you let them. I called my son from a rest stop outside of Columbus. He picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice was flat in the way it had been getting lately, like he was always half distracted by something just out of frame. "Just checking in. I'll be back by dinner time." "Okay. Text when you're close." That was it. "No, how was the drive?" "No, we missed you." I told myself it was just Ryan being Ryan, never one for long phone calls. I merged back onto the highway and turned up the radio. Mason had been living with Ryan for 8 months by then. My grandson had just turned 7 in January, born with his father's jaw and his mother's dark eyes. And when my daughter-in-law Carla passed away from the brain aneurysm 18 months ago, everything shifted. Mason came to stay with Ryan temporarily, and temporarily somehow became permanent, which I was glad for. Ryan was his father. Ryan should raise him. I had simply made it easier for that to happen by covering the mortgage on the house in Westerville, a 3-bedroom colonial that Ryan could not have qualified for alone on a landscaper's salary. We had an agreement. He would make the monthly payments back to me when he got on his feet. I had everything in writing. I trusted my son. I pulled onto Haverfield Drive just before 6 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet the way suburban Ohio gets in early April. Everything still a little gray and stubborn before spring fully commits. I noticed an unfamiliar minivan in the driveway, navy blue, with a cracked side mirror, parked crooked across the painted line. I pulled in behind it, gathered my bag from the back seat, and walked toward the front door. I heard it before I even reached the porch steps. "Mason," I said, "wipe down the counters. All of them. Don't give me that look." I stopped with my hand on the iron railing. The voice was high and sharp, a woman's voice, and it carried the particular tone of someone who had been annoyed for a long time before this moment. I knew that tone. I'd heard it in hospital hallways, in waiting rooms, in the voices of people who had stopped trying to hide that they resented where they were. I opened the front door. My grandson was standing at the kitchen sink, a dish rag in his hand, his small shoulders hunched up around his ears the way children do when they're trying to make themselves smaller. He was wearing his pajama shirt, the one with the little rocket ships on it, at 6 in the evening, which meant he hadn't been dressed all day. The counter in front of him was covered in dried cereal and coffee rings, and what looked like the remains of someone's lunch. He was scrubbing at it with both hands, his face turned down. Across the kitchen, sitting at the table with their legs stretched out, were 2 children I had never seen before. A girl, maybe 10, scrolling through something on a tablet. A boy, around 8, eating chips directly from a family-size bag. Neither of them looked up. Standing in the doorway to the living room was a woman I recognized from a photograph Ryan had texted me in February, his girlfriend, Tiffany. She was 34, pretty in a tired sort of way, with her hair pulled back and her arms crossed over her chest. When she saw me, her expression moved through several things quickly before it settled on a smile. "Oh, you must be Ryan's mom. He said you were coming back today." I looked at my grandson, Mason. He turned around, and when he saw me, his face broke open completely. He dropped the rag and ran across the kitchen and wrapped both arms around my waist and pressed his face into my jacket. And I felt him shaking just slightly, the way children shake when they've been holding something in for too long. "Hey, baby." I held the back of his head. "Hey, I'm here." Tiffany was still smiling. "He's just been helping out a little. We had a big lunch, and the kitchen got away from us." I looked at the counter. I looked at the 2 children at the table who had produced a significant portion of that mess and who were still not moving. I looked at my 7-year-old grandson in his pajama shirt. "Where's Ryan?" "Picking up Tyler from soccer." She meant her son, the 8-year-old with the chips. "He should be back in 20 minutes. I set my bag down by the door. I walked to the kitchen, found a clean dish towel, and I helped Mason finish wiping the counter. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to yet. But my mind was very clear and very quiet the way it gets when I've already made a decision, and I'm just waiting for the rest of the facts to confirm it. Ryan came home 23 minutes later with another child I didn't recognize, a lanky boy of about 12 in a muddy soccer uniform, and behind him, two more kids tumbling in through the back door, arguing about something involving a lost water bottle. I stood in the living room and counted, including Mason. There were 5 children in my son's house that night. 4 of them were Tiffany's. Ryan hugged me. He smelled like grass clippings and fast food. Good drive? Fine. Ryan, can we talk? Yeah, just let me get everyone settled. Ryan. He looked at me. He knew that voice too. We stood in the small back hallway near the laundry room, the sounds of the house all around us, and I asked him quietly how long Tiffany and her children had been living here. He rubbed the back of his neck. Since February, mostly. She was in a bad situation with her ex, and I told her she could stay while she figured things out. February. That's 2 months. Going on 3. And Mason's room? He looked at the floor. Tyler's in there with him now. They're sharing. My grandson was sharing his bedroom, the only bedroom that had been his, in any consistent way since his mother died, with a boy he'd known for 3 months. I thought about the rocket ship pajamas. I thought about the dish rag. Is he in school? I asked. What? Mason. Has he been going to school? Mrs. Patterson sent me an email in March about absences. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had a stomach thing. It was a few days. It was 9 days, Ryan. 9 days and 6 weeks. He didn't answer. I went back into the living room and sat with Mason on the couch while Tiffany ordered pizza and the other children argued over the television remote. My grandson leaned against me and showed me a drawing. He'd made a house with a garden and a large orange dog, even though we didn't have a dog, and I kept my hand on his back and listened to him tell me about the dog's name, which was Captain, and how Captain was very brave and could protect people. I drove home that night with a feeling I recognized from my 31 years as a registered nurse. It was the feeling of having assessed a situation and understood exactly how serious it was. My house was 20 minutes away, a brick ranch on Crestview that my late husband Gerald and I had bought in 1991. It was paid off, small, full of photographs, and the particular quiet of a home where the children have grown and moved away. I made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about what I had just seen. I had covered the mortgage on that Westerville house for 18 months, $1,200 a month, taken from my pension and from the savings Gerald and I had built together over 40 years. Ryan was supposed to be rebuilding his finances after Carla's death. I had never asked for anything back immediately. I had told him to get steady first. He had agreed to pay me back when he could. What I had not agreed to was paying the mortgage on a house that had quietly become home to 4 additional children and a woman Ryan had been dating for 5 months. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia, and she had handled Gerald's estate, and she had the kind of voice that made you feel like things could be organized. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. The house agreement, she said. Do you have the original documents? In the filing cabinet. I have everything. Good. Come see me Thursday. I went to see Mason every day that week. Each time I arrived, there was something. On Tuesday, I found him eating cereal alone at the counter at 7:30 in the morning, while Tiffany drove her older daughter to an orthodontist appointment, and Ryan was already at a job site. None of Tiffany's other children were awake yet. Mason had poured his own cereal and gotten the milk from the bottom shelf because he knew that was the one he could reach, and he had cleaned up the small spill by the refrigerator with paper towels that he'd put in the trash under the sink. He was 7 years old, and he had cleaned up after himself alone in a kitchen before school, because no adult had been there to notice. On Wednesday, I arrived in the afternoon and heard Tiffany talking on the phone in the backyard. I was helping Mason with the worksheet his teacher had sent home when I heard her say, very clearly, his mom is loaded. She paid cash for their last house. Ryan just doesn't like to ask her. I stayed quiet. I helped Mason sound out the word responsible. He did it perfectly on the 3rd try and grinned up at me, and I smiled back at him the way I meant it. On Thursday, I went to see Patricia. She reviewed the documents and asked me several specific questions, and then laid out my options in the clear way she had. You can call the loan due, she said. The agreement gives you that right with 30 days written notice if the terms have been materially altered, and housing additional residents without your knowledge or consent is a material alteration. I want to give Ryan a chance to make it right first. Of course. But you should know your position. I also asked her about Mason. She explained the difference between informal custody and legal guardianship, and what I would need to demonstrate. I wrote everything down in the small notebook I carry in my purse. That evening, I asked Ryan to meet me for coffee. Just the two of us, at the diner on Morse Road, where we used to go when he was a teenager and had something to work through. He came in looking cautious, the way grown children look when they know a conversation is coming that they'd rather avoid. I didn't come at him. I sat across from him and I said, "Tell me about Tiffany." He talked for almost 20 minutes. He told me about how they'd met at a job through a mutual friend, how she was going through a divorce that had gotten ugly, how her ex had stopped paying child support and she'd been falling behind on rent. He told me she was a good person in a hard situation. He told me he loved her. His voice was genuinely warm when he talked about her, and I noticed that, and I held it alongside everything else. "I believe you," I said. "But Ryan, Mason has missed 9 days of school." He was cleaning the kitchen at 6 in the evening in his pajamas, while 4 other kids sat at the table. He's sharing his room with a boy he barely knows. Ryan looked down at his coffee. "He's fine, Mom. He made a drawing this week of a house with a guard dog named Captain." I paused. "He's 7 years old, and he drew himself a guard dog." Ryan was quiet. "I need you to hear me," I said. "I am not against Tiffany. I am not trying to make your life harder. But Mason is my grandson. He is Carla's son. And right now he is the least protected person in that house, and that is not acceptable to me. I'll talk to Tiffany. You'll do more than that." He looked up. "You'll enroll him in after-school care starting Monday, so he has somewhere consistent to be when you're on a job site. You'll make sure he has his own room back within 30 days. If that means rearranging things in that house, then rearrange them. And you'll catch him up on those school days." "Mom, I'm not finished." I kept my voice even. "I have the loan documents, Ryan. The agreement we made. I want to keep honoring it. And I want you to keep the house. But if things don't change for Mason, I will exercise my right to call the loan due. And you and I will have a very different kind of conversation with Patricia in the room." He stared at me. For a moment, he looked exactly like the 15-year-old who had once argued with me about curfew, all injured pride and disbelief. Then something shifted in his face, something older and more tired. "I didn't realize it had gotten that bad," he said quietly. "With Mason. I know you didn't. I've been so caught up in—" He stopped. "I know." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "You've been trying to hold a lot at once. But your son is in that house too. And he needs to come first." Ryan nodded slowly. He didn't say much more that night. He paid for the coffee, and we hugged in the parking lot the way we used to when things were genuinely difficult between us, and we were both trying anyway. I thought that was the end of the hard part. It wasn't. What I didn't know yet was that Ryan had stopped making payments to me in January. Not just slowed down, stopped entirely. I discovered this when I pulled my bank records on a Friday afternoon 3 weeks later, going through them for a different reason, and I realized that the last transfer I had received from Ryan was dated November of last year, 5 months. He had quietly stopped paying me back 5 months ago and said nothing. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Patricia. She was calm, the way she always was. "Has he given any explanation?" "He doesn't know I've noticed yet. Do you want to give him the chance to explain before we proceed?" I thought about that. I thought about Tiffany on the phone in the backyard. His mom is loaded. Ryan just doesn't like to ask her. I thought about 5 months of silence. I thought about my grandson eating cereal alone at 7:30 in the morning. "Send the formal notice," I said. The letter went out the following Wednesday. 30 days written notice that I was exercising my right to call the loan due in full, citing the breach of the original agreement. Patricia drafted it precisely and without cruelty, the way a legal document should be. It went to Ryan's address by certified mail. He called me 45 minutes after the delivery confirmation. His voice was different than I had ever heard it. Not angry, more like someone who had just realized they were standing much closer to an edge than they'd thought. "Mom, what is this?" "It's exactly what it says it is. You can't be serious. We have an arrangement." "We had an arrangement. You stopped honoring it in November." Silence. "Ryan, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because things needed to change, and talking about it didn't work. You have 30 days. In that time, we can negotiate. I am still willing to restructure if I see real changes for Mason, and if I can't pay it back in 30 days, then we'll figure out the next steps together. But I need you to understand that I'm serious." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. "Is this really about the money, Mom? Or is this about Tiffany?" "It's about Mason," I said. "It has always been about Mason." I had already spoken to Patricia about guardianship, and the week after the letter I began the paperwork for temporary legal guardianship of my grandson. Not to take Mason away from his father permanently, that was never my intention, but to have the legal standing to make decisions for him. While Ryan figured out his priorities, Mason's school had a counselor, a young woman named Miss Fry, who had already noticed the changes in him over the past months, the quietness, the withdrawal, the way he flinched slightly at sudden loud voices. She was glad to speak with Patricia. It took 12 more days before Ryan called me again, and this time Tiffany was at the house with him. Ryan put me on speaker. I could hear her in the background, her voice controlled but tight. "We want to talk about the house," Ryan said. "I'm listening." "Tiffany has found an apartment in Gahana. She's moving the kids at the end of the month." I was quiet. "It's a 2-bedroom, he continued. "It's manageable for them. And her ex started making payments again last week so she can cover it." "Okay." And I talked to Mason's school. I set up the after-school program starting next Monday, and he's getting his room back this weekend. I heard Tiffany say something quietly in the background that I couldn't make out. Then Ryan said, "Tiffany has something she wants to say." A pause. Then her voice came through clearly, stripped of the social warmth it had when we'd first met. "I didn't realize how much of this was falling on Mason. That's not who I want to be." She stopped. "I'm sorry." I believed her, partially. I thought she was a woman who had been drowning and had grabbed whatever was closest without thinking about who else was underwater. That didn't make it acceptable, but it made it human. "I appreciate that," I said. The guardianship paperwork proceeded anyway, because Patricia advised me to have it in place, regardless of how things appeared to be improving. She was right. Having the legal standing changed things in ways that were immediate and practical. It meant that when Mason's teacher needed a decision made about his placement in a reading support program, I was there. It meant that when he needed a dental appointment his father had been postponing for 3 months, I made it myself. I withdrew the loan call 30 days later, after Ryan signed a restructured agreement and made the first payment under the new terms. Patricia had it notarized. I kept a copy in my filing cabinet next to Gerald's estate documents. The summer came slowly that year, the way Ohio summers do, warm and a little reluctant. Mason started a baseball league through the recreation center, which he had asked me about in April and which I had signed him up for the same afternoon. He wasn't particularly skilled, yet his throws went wide more often than not, but he ran the bases with everything he had, arms pumping, grinning at me in the bleachers. I came to every game. I sat in the 3rd row with a thermos of coffee and a small notepad where I kept the score. And afterward, we always went to the Dairy Queen on Carl Road, and he always got the same thing, a medium vanilla cone with rainbow sprinkles, and we sat in the car with the windows down, and I let him talk as much as he wanted, about whatever he wanted, which was usually baseball, or Captain the Imaginary Dog, or the video game Ryan had gotten him, and that I pretended to understand. One afternoon in late July, he looked up at me with vanilla ice cream on his chin and said, "Grandma, are you going to move in with us?" "No, sweetheart. I have my own house. Can I come to your house sometimes?" "You can come whenever you want." He thought about that. Even on school nights? Even on school nights. He went back to his ice cream. After a moment, he said, very quietly, without looking up, I like it better now. I looked at him. Better than what? He shrugged his small shoulders. Just better. I reached over and wiped his chin. Me too, baby. Ryan and I were in a careful place. The way you are with someone you love and have also had to hold accountable. We didn't talk about the letter or the loan or the specifics very often. What we talked about instead was Mason's baseball and Ryan's new contract with a property management company that was giving him steadier work, and occasionally Tiffany, who was still in Ryan's life but no longer in Ryan's house, and that was a line that seemed to be holding. There were still hard days. There were days when Ryan called me frustrated, when the schedules didn't align, and Mason ended up at my house for dinner 3 nights in a row because Tiffany's custody situation with her own kids had shifted and Ryan was compensating. I fed my grandson and helped him with homework and watched the same animated movie with him for what felt like the 11th time and said nothing about the schedule because some things you hold and absorb rather than add to the pile. But there were also mornings when I arrived to pick Mason up for school, and he was dressed, had eaten breakfast, had his backpack by the door, and Ryan was in the kitchen pouring coffee and asked me if I wanted a cup. Those mornings felt like something. Not fixed, not finished, but like a foundation, being laid again after the flood. In September, Miss Fry sent me a note that she asked me to share with Ryan. She said Mason had had the best start to a school year she had seen from him, that he was engaged in class and had made 2 close friends during summer transition, and that his reading had jumped a full level. She said he had told her he wanted to be a veterinarian or a baseball player, in that order. I read that note twice, then put it in the filing cabinet with the loan documents and the guardianship papers, because it belonged there, with the things that mattered. On the last Saturday of October, Mason's team played in the end-of-season tournament. They didn't win, they lost in the second round to a team from Upper Arlington whose pitcher was a head taller than anyone on Mason's team and who had clearly been playing since before he could read. But Mason got a hit in the 3rd inning that sent his teammate home. And the look on his face when he reached first base, wide eyes, mouth open, unable to believe his own body had done that, was something I will keep with me for a long time. Ryan was there. He was standing 2 bleachers down from me. And when Mason got the hit, he jumped up the way fathers do, arms raised, and he yelled his son's name loud enough that Mason found him immediately in the crowd and pointed at him with pure, uncomplicated joy. I sat back down. I poured the last of my coffee. The October sky above the ball field was the particular blue that doesn't last long in Ohio before gray moves in for good. And I thought about Gerald, who had never seen this grandson play, and I thought about Carla, who would have had her camera out for that hit and would have already texted the video to everyone she knew. I thought about the 7-year-old in rocket ship pajamas scrubbing a counter and the 7-year-old 2 feet in front of me rounding first base at full speed. I did not go to the team celebration dinner after the game. Mason went with Ryan, and I drove home through the late afternoon traffic and made a cup of tea and sat in the living room in the chair by the window, where the lamp made a circle of yellow light in the dusk. My phone showed 3 texts from Mason. A blurry photo of his participation trophy, a second photo of him holding a hot dog with both hands, and a third message that was only a string of baseball emojis followed by a heart. I texted back the same heart. Outside the window, the street was quiet, the leaves coming down from the oak in the front yard the way they did every year, slow and unhurried and absolutely certain of where they were going. The house was still. I thought about the summer and the months before it, and the long drive home from Portland in the early April gray, and the sound of a small boy's voice being told to clean a kitchen he had not dirtied. Then I finished my tea and washed the cup and turned off the lamp and went to bed. And I slept soundly, the way you sleep when you have done what needed to be done.